I mentioned in an earlier lecture that many of the dilemmas and situations that we're going to be exploring in our discussions and in our reading, they will relate to situations and dilemmas that we face in our real lives. And the hope is that if you contend with these kinds of dilemmas in a relatively stress-free environment or course, that you'll be better prepared to deal with those dilemmas when they manifest in your life in a stressful situation. Now, some of the dilemmas that we're going to be exploring and some of the situations we'll be exploring in our course, they will not, thankfully, relate to any situations you ever encounter in your life. And I say thankfully because some of these situations are going to be nightmare fuel, right? They're going to involve really unpleasant things to think about. And it can be tempting to think to yourself, why am I thinking very deeply about this very unpleasant situation that I'm not likely to ever encounter in my own life? And my answer to that question is this: because you might. And some of you probably will. And if you're going to encounter nightmare scenarios in your life, I would argue you're better off having confronted those possibilities ahead of time to at least get some clarity about what matters to you in these kinds of nightmarish scenarios. I'll give you an example. Okay, it's a story called the Afghan Goatherds, and it involves 4 Navy SEALs who back in, I think it was 2004, these Navy SEALs were in Afghanistan during the Afghanistan War, and they had been tasked with doing reconnaissance in the mountains of Afghanistan. In other words, they had been tasked with going out and trying to find locations where Taliban fighters were located. And the goal here is to be able to get that information without anybody knowing they're there, because it's a very dangerous place to be. So there's only 4 of them, and so they're creeping around these mountains in Afghanistan, and all of a sudden they come across a bunch of goats and a couple of goat herders and a 14-year-old boy. Okay, so their location has been revealed to at least these 3 people and the goats. They're all unarmed. Okay, now these 4 Navy SEALs had a decision to make. There's no rope that they have with them to tie them up. And even if they did, if they tie them up out in the middle of the desert, they're likely to die. So the choice that they have is we can either shoot them and kill them now, or we can let them go. And hopefully if we let them go, they won't go to the Taliban. Hopefully they're not Taliban sympathizers. And if we let them go, they won't go to the Taliban and reveal our location. So we can kill them or let them go. What would you do in that situation? Okay, so again, just like in the trolley dilemma, you don't have the option of tying them up. You don't have the option of bribing them. You have two options available to you: kill them or let them go. What would you do? Well, this is what they did. They did what I hope we would do, which is they had an argument about what to do. And one soldier said this: we're on active duty behind enemy lines, and we have a right to do everything we can to save our own lives. Another soldier named Marcus Luttrell steps up and says, I disagree. It would be wrong to execute these unarmed men in cold blood. Okay, so you have 2 competing positions on what the right choice is. They voted 2-1 to let them go. Okay, so 1 person voted to kill him, 2 person voted to let him go. 1 person abstained and said, I'm not having any part of this. They let him go. They went straight to the Taliban fighters. 90 minutes later, you've got 100 Taliban fighters on the scene, kills 3 of the 4 Navy SEALs. The rescue helicopter that's coming to get them is shot down, killing everybody on board. And there's a lone survivor, Marcus Luttrell. In fact, I think there's a name of a movie based on this event called Lone Survivor, which I've not seen. But the one survivor is Marcus Luttrell, one of the 2 people to vote to let them go. And this is what he said afterwards, which is really interesting. It was the stupidest, most southern fried, lame-brained decision I ever made in my life. I must have been out of my mind. I had actually cast a vote which I knew could sign our death warrant. At least that's how I look back on those moments now. The deciding vote was mine, and it will haunt me till they rest me in an East Texas grave. So there's a couple of things to think about here for yourself. Does now knowing the outcome of the decision bear on the moral wisdom of the decision that Marcus Luttrell made at the time? In other words, Marcus Luttrell didn't know what was going to happen as a result of letting these people go. He didn't know for sure what would happen. He knew it was possible, but he didn't know for sure. And his position was, I don't think it's moral to kill these unarmed people without evidence that they present a real threat. We don't have any way of knowing if the threat they possibly present is an actual threat. Does it matter to you that the outcome was unpleasant? Does it matter to you when you're evaluating the wisdom of the decision that he made, knowing what he knew at the time? Or do you find yourself saying to the soldier Luttrell, look, dude, don't beat yourself up about this. You didn't know at the time what you know now. So what you know now can't have bearing on what you decided to do then, absent this information. And you can see this thought has sort of occurred to him, right? Look what he says right here. At least that's how I look back on those moments now. Okay? So when we're facing these moral dilemmas in our lives, we're always going to lack information. We're never going to know everything there is that we would want to know when we have to make this decision. And later on, we're going to find things out and discover new information that may have caused us to make a different decision at the time. And one thing I want you to think about is this, is does the outcome of your action have any bearing on the morality of your action? Okay? Does what actually happens as a result of what you do determine in any way the moral quality of the action you took? Or is the only thing that's relevant to the moral quality of the action when you take it is what you know at the time that you take that action? Okay, so that's something to kind of put in your head and think about as we move forward with the next couple of weeks of our thought primers.